I never should have taken that babysitting job. The night started like any other. A text from Mrs. Anderson asking if I was free to watch Lily and Max for a few hours. I'd babysat for them dozens of times before, so I didn't think twice about saying yes. If only I'd known what was waiting for me in that house. I arrived just before 7 p.m., greeted by the familiar chaos of the Andersons getting ready for their night out. Mrs. Anderson was frantically searching for her other earring, while Mr. Anderson tried to wrangle Max into his pajamas. 6-year-old Lily sat on the stairs, already in her nightgown, watching the commotion with amusement. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, Emma," Mrs. Anderson exclaimed when she saw me. She rushed over, still only wearing one earring. "The kids have already had dinner, so you just need to get Max to bed by 8 and Lily by 8:30. There are cookies in the kitchen if they want a small treat, but no more than 2 each." I nodded, having heard this routine many times before. "No problem, Mrs. Anderson. You two have a great night out." After a flurry of kisses and goodbyes, the parents were out the door, leaving me alone with the kids. Max immediately demanded a piggyback ride, while Lily asked if we could watch a movie. "How about we play a game first?" I suggested, knowing I needed to tire them out before bedtime. Hide and seek. The next hour flew by in a blur of giggles and shrieks as we chased each other around the house. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, Max was yawning and rubbing his eyes. "All right, buddy," I said, scooping him up. "Time for bed." After tucking Max in and reading him a short story, I headed back downstairs to find Lily. She was curled up on the couch, engrossed in a book. 30 more minutes, Lily," I reminded her. She nodded without looking up. I settled into the armchair across from her, pulling out my phone to scroll through social media. The house fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional turning of a page or the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from upstairs. I froze, my thumb hovering over my phone screen. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Old houses make noises all the time. But then I heard it again, louder this time. Lily looked up from her book, her brow furrowed. What was that? "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Maybe Max dropped something in his sleep. I'll go check on him." I stood up, my heart pounding a little faster than normal. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard another noise. This time it sounded like footsteps. My palms began to sweat as I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The upstairs hallway was dark, shadows stretching across the walls in eerie shapes. Max's room was at the far end, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the slight creak. "Max," I whispered. Moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating Max's small form under the covers. He was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. Nothing seemed out of place. I let out a shaky breath, feeling slightly foolish for getting so worked up. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Max's toy chest was open, a few stuffed animals spilling out onto the floor. Hadn't I closed that earlier? Shaking my head, I quickly tucked the toys back in and shut the lid. It was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. Back downstairs, Lily was exactly where I'd left her. "Is Max okay?" she asked. "He's fine, sound asleep," I assured her. "Come on, it's your bedtime now, too." After getting Lily settled in bed, I headed back downstairs, feeling more at ease. The house was quiet again, and I chuckled to myself for getting so spooked earlier. I decided to make some tea to calm my nerves completely. As the kettle boiled, I leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through my phone again. A notification popped up, a news alert about a string of break-ins in the area. I frowned, reading the details. The burglar had been targeting houses where people were home, sneaking in unnoticed, and a floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. The kitchen was empty, but I could have sworn I heard. There it was again, coming from the living room this time. "Lily?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Is that you? You should be in bed." No response. With trembling hands, I picked up a heavy wooden spoon from the counter. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer as I crept towards the living room. The room was dark. shadows dancing across the walls from the streetlight outside. My eyes darted from corner to corner, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed out of place, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong. That's when I saw it. Muddy footprints on the carpet, leading from the front door to the stairs. Footprints that definitely hadn't been there earlier. My blood ran cold. Someone was in the house. Panic seized me as I realized the kids were upstairs, alone and vulnerable. I had to get to them, had to protect them somehow. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, terror paralyzing me. A creak from upstairs snapped me out of it. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, no longer caring about the noise I was making. My only thought was getting to Lily and Max. I burst into Lily's room first, relief flooding through me when I saw her still asleep in bed. Without waking her, I scooped her up and rushed to Max's room. He stirred as I lifted him, but I shushed him gently. "We're going to play a quiet game," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to go downstairs without making a sound, okay?" Max nodded sleepily, while Lily looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. She could sense something was wrong. As quietly as possible, I led them down the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was in the house would hear it. We made it to the bottom when I heard it, heavy footsteps coming from the parents' bedroom. "Run!" I hissed, pushing the kids towards the front door. We were almost there when a dark figure appeared at the top of the stairs. I heard Lily let out a small scream. In that moment, pure adrenaline took over. I shoved the kids behind me and faced the intruder, holding up the wooden spoon like a weapon. "Stay back!" I yelled, my voice stronger than I felt. "I've called the police!" The figure paused, and for a moment I thought my bluff had worked. Then, with surprising speed, he started down the stairs. "Lily, Max, run next door and get help!" I shouted, keeping my eyes on the approaching threat. I heard the front door open and the patter of small feet on the porch. The intruder lunged forward, but I stood my ground, swinging the spoon with all my might. It connected with a satisfying thunk, and the man stumbled back with a grunt of pain. Taking advantage of his momentary disorientation, I ran for the door. I could hear him recovering behind me, his heavy footsteps giving chase. My hand closed around the doorknob, twisting desperately. In that split second, I felt a rough hand grab my shoulder. I screamed, louder than I ever had in my life, as I was yanked backwards. Suddenly, the night air hit my face. I found myself on the front lawn, strong arms wrapped around me. It took me a moment to realize it was Mr. Anderson, with Mrs. Anderson right behind him. Red and blue lights flashed in the street as police cars pulled up. Emma, are you all right?" Mrs. Anderson was asking, her face pale with worry. I couldn't speak, could only shake my head as the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me shaky and nauseous. "The kids," I finally managed to gasp. "Where are the kids?" "They're safe," Mr. Anderson assured me. "They're at the neighbor's house. You saved them, Emma." As the police swarmed into the house, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I started to cry, the fear and stress of the night finally overwhelming me. Later, after giving my statement to the police and being checked over by paramedics, I learned the full story. The intruder had been targeting houses in the area, breaking in while people were home. He'd been watching the Anderson house, waiting for a vulnerable moment. When he saw the parents leave, he thought it was the perfect opportunity. What he hadn't counted on was a babysitter who would do anything to protect her charges. The police caught him trying to escape through the back door. Thanks to my description and the evidence he left behind, he was linked to several other break-ins in the area. The Andersons called me a hero, but I didn't feel like one. For weeks after, I jumped at every shadow, checked every lock twice. I couldn't bring myself to babysit again. But slowly, with time and therapy, I began to heal. I realized that on that terrifying night, I had found a strength in myself I never knew existed. It changed me, yes, but it also showed me what I was capable of. I never took that babysitting job for granted again, and I never again underestimated the power of a wooden spoon. The day my smart home turned against me started like any other. I never imagined that the technology meant to make my life easier would become my worst nightmare. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and I was curled up on my couch binge-watching my favorite show. The soft glow of my smart lights created a cozy atmosphere, and I was lost in the drama unfolding on my TV screen. That's when my phone buzzed with a notification that would change everything. At first, I ignored it. I was at a crucial part of the episode, and I figured it was probably just another app update or a social media alert. But when my phone buzzed again, more insistently this time, I reluctantly tore my eyes away from the screen. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the notification. Unknown device accessed your smart home system. I sat up straight, suddenly alert. That couldn't be right. I lived alone, and I hadn't given anyone else access to my system. Maybe it was a glitch? As if to answer my unspoken question, the lights in my living room flickered. Once, twice, then off completely, plunging me into darkness. Before I could even reach for my phone's flashlight, they came back on, brighter than before. "What the hell?" I muttered, getting to my feet. I opened my smart home app, my fingers trembling slightly as I navigated to the device list. Everything seemed normal at first glance. My lights, thermostat, security cameras, and smart locks all showed up as connected. But then I noticed something odd. There was an extra device listed, simply labeled unknown. A chill ran down my spine. This was no glitch. As I stared at my phone screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the lights began to flicker again. But this time it wasn't random. It was a pattern, almost like Morse code. On, off, on, off. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted tech horror movie. This couldn't be happening. I tried to override the system, frantically tapping at my phone to turn off all the lights. Nothing happened. Whatever, or whoever, had accessed my system had locked me out. The TV suddenly turned on by itself, startling me so badly that I nearly dropped my phone. Static filled the screen, the harsh sound grating against my nerves. Then, slowly, words began to form amidst the static. "I see you." My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But the room was empty. Of course it was. All my doors and windows were locked, weren't they? A new fear gripped me as I realized I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. If someone had hacked my smart home system, did that mean they could unlock my doors too? As if reading my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. Another notification from my smart home app. Front door unlocked. Panic surged through me. I ran to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The smart lock glowed green, confirming what the app had told me. Someone had unlocked my door remotely. With shaking hands, I manually locked the door and slid the chain into place. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer. I leaned against the door, trying to calm my racing thoughts and figure out what to do next. Call the police? But what would I tell them? That my house was haunted by a tech-savvy ghost? They'd think I was crazy. Besides, I wasn't even sure if a crime had been committed yet. Someone had accessed my system without permission, sure, but was that enough for the police to take seriously? I decided to try resetting the entire system. I hurried to the utility closet where the main hub was installed, intending to unplug it and cut off whoever was controlling my home. But as I reached for the power cord, the closet door slammed shut, nearly catching my fingers. I yelped, jumping back. The door had closed on its own, another smart feature that was now being used against me. I tugged at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Somehow it had locked automatically. Frustration mingled with my fear. I was trapped in my own home, being toyed with by some unseen hacker. I needed help, and I needed it now. I grabbed my phone, intending to call a friend, but the screen was blank. Dead. But that was impossible. It had been almost fully charged just minutes ago. I pressed the power button repeatedly, growing more frantic with each attempt. Nothing. The TV crackled to life again, the static resolving into more words. "No one can help you now." A sob escaped me. I was alone, cut off from the outside world, at the mercy of whoever was doing this. The lights began to flicker more rapidly, an erratic strobe that made me dizzy and disoriented. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. My blood ran cold. There was someone in my house. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy table lamp. I unplugged it, gripping it tightly as I backed into a corner, my eyes fixed on the staircase. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear the creak of the floorboards, the sound impossibly loud in the otherwise silent house. My palms were sweaty, my grip on the lamp handle tenuous at best. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. I held my breath, my entire body tense, ready to spring into action. But as the figure descended, I realized something was off. The movements were too smooth, too regular. It wasn't a person. It was my robot vacuum cleaner, somehow activated and moving of its own accord. I let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through me. But my reprieve was short-lived. As the vacuum reached the bottom of the stairs, it suddenly changed direction, heading straight for me at an unnaturally high speed. I yelped, scrambling to get out of its way. It pursued me around the living room, herding me like a sheepdog. I leapt onto the couch, watching in horror as the usually docile machine bumped aggressively against the furniture, trying to reach me. This was insane. I needed to get out of the house now. I jumped off the couch and made a dash for the front door, the vacuum hot on my heels. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers clumsy with panic. Finally, the door swung open. I burst out onto my front porch, gasping for air, expecting to see my quiet suburban street, to call for help. Instead, I found myself staring at my living room. Somehow, impossibly, I was back where I started. I spun around, disoriented. The open door behind me now led to my kitchen. I was trapped in some kind of spatial loop. The layout of my house twisted into an Escher-like puzzle. I slumped to the floor, my mind reeling. This went beyond hacking. What was happening to me defied the laws of physics. Was I losing my mind? The lights dimmed, and in the semi-darkness, I saw words forming on the wall, as if written by an invisible hand. Welcome to your new reality. I closed my eyes, willing this nightmare to end. When I opened them again, everything was back to normal. The lights were steady, the TV off, my phone alive and functioning in my hand. The vacuum cleaner sat innocently in its charging dock, as if it had never moved. Had I imagined it all? Was it some kind of elaborate hallucination? With trembling fingers, I opened my smart home app. Everything appeared normal, no unknown devices, all systems functioning as they should. I checked my security cameras, scrolling back through the footage of the last hour. There was no evidence of anything unusual happening, just me, sitting on the couch, then suddenly jumping up and running around the house like a mad woman. I sank onto the couch, my mind whirling. Had I experienced some kind of psychotic break? Should I see a doctor? But the memory of what I'd experienced felt so real, so vivid. As I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. With a sense of dread, I opened it. Hope you enjoyed the demo. Your smart home system is more powerful than you think. Sweet dreams. I stared at the message, a chill running down my spine. It hadn't been a hallucination or a dream. Someone had actually done this, had turned my home into a terrifying funhouse for their own amusement, and they could do it again. In that moment, I made a decision. I got up, went to my utility closet, and yanked out every smart device hub I could find. I deleted the apps from my phone, changed all my passwords. By the time the sun rose, my house was just a house again. No smart features, no internet-connected devices, just walls and doors and simple manual locks. Some might call it an overreaction, a step backwards in this age of technological convenience. But as I finally drifted off to sleep in my now dumb home, I felt safer than I had in years. Because sometimes the price of convenience is too high, and some things are better left unconnected. The sound of my daughter's laughter at 3 a.m. was the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. It wasn't her usual giggle, but something darker, almost sinister. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong in our home. My wife Sarah and I had always been light sleepers, especially since Lily was born 3 years ago. So when that eerie laugh echoed through the baby monitor, we both jolted awake instantly. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with concern. I nodded, already swinging my legs out of bed. I'll go check on her. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my bare feet as I padded down the hallway. Our old Victorian house always seemed to amplify sounds at night, and I could swear I heard whispers coming from Lily's room. My heart rate picked up as I approached her door, which was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the slight creak. "Lily?" I called softly. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" The room was bathed in the soft glow of her nightlight, casting long shadows across the walls. Lily was standing in the middle of the room, her back to me, still in her favorite unicorn pajamas. "Lily," I said again, a little louder this time. She turned to face me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Her eyes were wide open, but there was something off about her expression. It was almost as if she was looking through me rather than at me. "The man told me to wake you up, Daddy," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. "What man, sweetie?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. Lily pointed to the corner of the room near her closet. "The man right there. Can't you see him?" I followed her gaze, my eyes straining in the dim light. The corner was empty, just shadows and her stuffed animals piled high. But as I stared, I could have sworn I saw something move just for a second. "There's no one there, Lily," I said, more to convince myself than her. "You must have been dreaming." She shook her head emphatically. "No, Daddy, he's right there. He says you need to go downstairs." A chill ran through me. This was more than just a child's imagination. Something was very wrong. "Okay, sweetie," I said, trying to sound calm. "How about we go back to Mommy's room for now?" I scooped Lily up into my arms, noticing how cold she felt. As I turned to leave the room, I heard it, a distinct creak from downstairs, like someone stepping on that one loose floorboard in the living room. My heart nearly stopped. We definitely weren't alone in the house. I rushed back to our bedroom, Lily still in my arms. Sarah was sitting up in bed, her face pale with worry. "What's going on?" she whispered as soon as I entered. "Call the police," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I think someone's in the house." Sarah's eyes widened in fear, but she nodded, reaching for her phone on the nightstand. As she dialed, I set Lily down on the bed and moved to the closet, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a baseball bat, a souvenir from a game we'd attended last summer. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little less helpless. "They're sending someone now," Sarah whispered, ending the call. "What do we do?" I was about to suggest barricading ourselves in the room when Lily spoke up again. "The man says you need to come downstairs, Daddy," she insisted, that same eerie calmness in her voice. "He says it's important." Sarah and I exchanged terrified glances. How could Lily know about someone downstairs? Unless— "Stay here," I told Sarah, gripping the bat tightly. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but the police." "John, no!" Sarah hissed, grabbing my arm. "You can't go down there." I cupped her face with my free hand, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I have to. If there's someone in our house, I need to protect you and Lily. The police will be here soon. I just need to buy some time." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she nodded, understanding. I kissed her quickly, then pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead. My daughter was still staring at that empty corner of the room, seemingly oblivious to the tension around her. With one last look at my family, I stepped out into the hallway. I heard the click of the lock behind me, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was waiting downstairs. The house seemed different somehow as I crept down the stairs, bat raised and ready. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and every creak and groan of the old building sent my heart racing. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my eyes darting around the darkened living room. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. The front door was still locked, the windows intact. But then I saw it. Muddy footprints leading from the back of the house towards the kitchen. I followed the trail, my grip on the bat so tight my knuckles were white. As I approached the kitchen, I could hear something, a soft, rhythmic sound, breathing. I paused at the kitchen doorway, my whole body tense. The breathing was clearer now, coming from just around the corner. I took one more deep breath, then stepped into the room, bat raised high. The kitchen was empty. I blinked, confused. The breathing had stopped. I did a quick scan of the room. No sign of an intruder, no place for someone to hide. Had I imagined it? That's when I noticed the back door. It was ever so slightly ajar, a cool night breeze causing the curtain to flutter. My mind raced. Had the intruder just left? Should I check outside? But what if it was a trick to lure me out of the house? Before I could decide, I heard a scream from upstairs. Sarah. I sprinted back to the stairs, taking them two at a time. My wife's screams mixed with Lily's cries, the sounds driving me forward with a surge of adrenaline. Sarah, I yelled, reaching the top of the stairs. Lily. The door to our bedroom was wide open. I rushed in, bat still in hand, ready to face whatever threat had gotten to my family. The scene that greeted me made no sense. Sarah was on the bed, clutching Lily tightly. Both were crying, but they seemed physically unharmed. And there, in the corner of the room, the same corner Lily had pointed to earlier, stood a figure. It was hazy, indistinct, like looking at a person through frosted glass, but it was undeniably human-shaped, and it was staring right at me. I raised the bat, my voice shaking as I shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't move or speak. It just stood there watching. "John," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, "can you see it too?" I nodded, not taking my eyes off the intruder. "What happened? How did it get in here?" "It just appeared," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "One minute the room was empty, and the next—" Lily's small voice piped up, still eerily calm. "I told you the man was here, Daddy. He's been waiting for you." As if triggered by Lily's words, the figure began to move. Not towards us, but towards the wall. As we watched in horrified fascination, it simply passed through the solid surface, disappearing from view. For a moment, we sat in stunned silence, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Then, as if a spell had been broken, we sprang into action. I grabbed Lily while Sarah snatched up her phone, and we raced downstairs and out of the house. We were huddled in our car, doors locked, when the police finally arrived. We gave our statement, but I could see the skepticism in the officers' eyes as we tried to describe what we'd seen. They searched the house thoroughly but found no signs of an intruder. The back door was locked and secure, with no signs of forced entry. In the light of day, it was easy to doubt what we'd experienced. Maybe it had been a shared hallucination, a product of stress and an overactive imagination. But deep down, we knew the truth. Something had been in our house that night, something that defied explanation. We put the house on the market the very next day. As we packed up our belongings, Lily would sometimes stop and stare at empty corners, a knowing look in her eyes. We never asked what she saw. Some questions are better left unanswered. We moved across the country, settling into a new home with no history and no unexplained presences. But sometimes late at night, I still find myself listening for that eerie laughter, for whispers in empty rooms. And I wonder about the man in the corner, about what he wanted, and why he chose our family that night. Some say that children are more attuned to the supernatural, that they can see things adults can't. After that night, I'm inclined to believe it, but it also makes me wonder, what else might be out there just beyond our perception, and what happens when those things decide to make themselves known? One thing's for certain, I'll never ignore my daughter's laughter in the middle of the night again, because sometimes the things we can't see are the most terrifying of all. The package that arrived on my doorstep wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible, and it would turn my quiet suburban life into a waking nightmare. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where time seems to stretch endlessly. I was sprawled on the couch, half watching a football game and contemplating whether I had the energy to mow the lawn. That's when my phone buzzed with a notification. "Package delivered," it read. I frowned, puzzled. I hadn't ordered anything recently, and it was Sunday, no mail delivery today. Curiosity got the better of me. I heaved myself off the couch and shuffled to the front door, my bare feet slapping against the cool hardwood floor. When I opened the door, there it was, a plain brown box, about the size of a shoebox, sitting innocently on my welcome mat. No labels, no postage marks, Nothing to indicate where it had come from or how it got there. Just a perfectly ordinary box that had no business being on my doorstep. I glanced up and down the street, half expecting to see a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor playing a prank. But the street was deserted, shimmering quietly in the afternoon heat. Against my better judgment, I picked up the box. It was surprisingly light, as if it might be empty. I brought it inside, shutting the door behind me with a soft click that seemed oddly final. Back in the living room, I set the box on the coffee table and stared at it. Common sense told me I shouldn't open an unmarked package from an unknown sender, but curiosity gnawed at me. What harm could there be in a nearly empty box? I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. My heart began to race as I unfolded it, revealing a message in crisp black typewriter font. "I'm already in your house." I dropped the note as if it had burned me, my eyes darting around the room. The house was silent except for the muffled sounds of the TV. Everything looked normal, undisturbed. But suddenly, the familiar space felt alien and threatening. It had to be a sick joke, I told myself. Some bored teenagers playing a prank on the neighborhood. But as I stood there, my palms sweating and my heart pounding, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. "Hello?" I called out, hating how my voice quavered. No response. I needed to call the police. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. As I fumbled with the device, I heard another sound, the unmistakable click of a door latch. It came from upstairs. Terror gripped me. Someone was in my house, moving around freely while I stood frozen in fear. I needed to get out, to run to a neighbor's house and call for help. But as I turned toward the front door, a chilling thought stopped me in my tracks. What if they were waiting for me to do just that? The game on TV suddenly seemed obscenely loud. I lunged for the remote, muting it. In the new silence, I strained my ears for any sound, any clue as to where the intruder might be. Nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe this was all just a product of an overactive imagination and too many late-night thriller movies. I almost convinced myself of this when I saw it, a shadow, just for a moment, passing by the top of the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. This was real. Terrifyingly, undeniably real. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy glass vase on the mantelpiece. I crept over and picked it up, its weight somehow reassuring in my hands. Armed with my makeshift weapon, I faced a choice. Try to escape, risking an encounter with the intruder, or hide and hope they didn't find me before help arrived. The decision was made for me when I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, coming down. I ducked into the coat closet near the front door, pulling it shut as quietly as I could. Through the slats, I had a partial view of the living room and the bottom of the staircase. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath, clutching the vase so tightly my knuckles turned white. A figure stepped into view. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed all in black. He moved with an eerie grace, almost gliding across the floor. I couldn't see his face. It was obscured by a featureless white mask. He paused in the middle of the living room, head tilted as if listening. Then, to my horror, he turned slowly toward the closet. I pressed myself against the back wall, willing myself to melt into the coats hanging around me. The footsteps approached. A shadow fell across the closet door. The handle began to turn. In that moment, survival instinct took over. As the door swung open, I burst out, swinging the vase with all my might. It connected with a satisfying crunch, and the intruder stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see if he'd fall. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I heard a low groan and the sound of movement. My fingers finally found the deadbolt, and I wrenched the door open, spilling out onto the front porch. The bright sunlight was disorienting after the dimness of the house. I stumbled down the steps, screaming for help. A neighbor across the street was watering his lawn. He looked up, startled by my cries. "Call the police!" I yelled, running toward him. "There's someone in my house!" He dropped the hose and rushed inside, presumably to make the call. I turned back to my house, half expecting to see the masked figure emerging. But the doorway remained empty. What followed was a blur of police sirens, questions, and room-by-room searches. They found no one in the house, no sign of forced entry. The only evidence that anything had happened was the shattered vase on the living room floor and the note, still sitting in its unmarked box. The police were skeptical. They suggested it might have been a prank gone wrong, or that I had perhaps fallen asleep and had an unusually vivid nightmare. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced. As the day wore on and no further evidence was uncovered, I began to doubt myself. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? It wasn't until later that evening, after the police had gone and I was left alone in my house, a house that no longer felt like home, that I discovered the truth. I was in my bedroom, packing a bag. There was no way I could spend the night here, not after what had happened. As I was grabbing clothes from my dresser, something caught my eye. A small, folded piece of paper tucked into the corner of the mirror. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. The message inside made my blood run cold. "You're a better player than I expected. Round 2 begins now." I dropped the note, my mind reeling. This wasn't over. It had never been over. The package, the intruder, the chase, it had all been some sick game, and I was the unwitting player. In a panic, I grabbed my phone to call the police again, but before I could dial, a text message popped up from an unknown number. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. The police are so boring, don't you think? Let's keep this between us." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the call button. Another text came through. "Make the call and the game changes. People you care about might find themselves invited to play. You don't want that, do you?" My finger moved away from the call button. Whoever this was, they had been in my house, had access to my phone. What else did they have access to? What else did they know about me? As the realization of my situation sank in, my phone buzzed one more time. "Good choice. Now, are you ready to play?" I looked around my bedroom, a space that had once been a sanctuary, now transformed into a stage for some twisted game. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every ordinary object a potential clue or trap. I didn't know who was behind this or why they had chosen me. I didn't know what the rules of this game were or what winning or losing might mean. But I did know one thing. I had no choice but to play. As I stood there, my bag half packed and my world turned upside down, I couldn't help but think back to that innocuous notification on my phone just a few hours ago. "Package delivered," it had said. If only I had known then what that delivery would unleash. If only I had left that plain brown box sitting on my doorstep, unopened and ignored. But I hadn't. I had opened Pandora's box, and now I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, a nightmare that was just beginning. My phone buzzed again. With a sense of dread, I looked at the new message. "Let the game begin." And just like that, my ordinary life was over. A new reality had been delivered to my doorstep, and there was no sending it back. I never thought my dedication to keeping our neighborhood safe would lead to the most terrifying night of my life. But as I stood there, staring at the muddy footprints leading up my own stairs, I realized that sometimes the danger you're trying to protect others from finds its way right to your doorstep. It all started 3 months ago when a string of break-ins hit our usually quiet suburban neighborhood. The police seemed overwhelmed and underprepared, so a group of us decided to take matters into our own hands. We formed a neighborhood watch program, determined to keep our community safe. I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. Maybe it was the ex-military guy in me, or maybe I just needed something to fill the long hours while my wife, Sarah, worked night shifts at the hospital. Whatever the reason, I quickly became known as the most dedicated member of our little group. Every night, I'd patrol the streets, flashlight in hand, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. Most nights were uneventful, just the occasional raccoon rummaging through trash cans or teenagers sneaking out past curfew. But I felt like I was making a difference, and that was enough. Until tonight. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I was just finishing up my usual route. The streets were quiet, most houses dark except for the odd porch light. As I rounded the corner onto my street, something caught my eye. A window on the second floor of my house was open. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. That window was always closed and locked. Sarah was adamant about it, especially since the break-ins started, and she wasn't due home for hours. I approached my house cautiously, every sense on high alert. The front door was still locked, and nothing seemed disturbed on the ground floor. But as I shone my flashlight around, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Muddy footprints leading from the side of the house to the back. My first instinct was to call the police, but a nagging voice in my head stopped me. What if it was nothing? What if Sarah had come home early and forgotten to close the window? I'd feel like an idiot calling in the cavalry over nothing. So against my better judgment, I decided to check it out myself. I had my cell phone ready to dial 911 at a moment's notice, and I knew every inch of my house. I could handle this. I entered through the back door, moving as quietly as I could. The kitchen was dark and silent, everything in its place. But as I moved towards the living room, I heard it, a soft thud from upstairs. My heart was racing now, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I gripped my flashlight tighter, wishing I had something more substantial as a weapon. But it was too late to back out now. I made my way up the stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wood beneath my feet. The upstairs hallway was pitch black, the open window at the end letting in a cool breeze that sent shivers down my spine. That's when I saw them. Muddy footprints leading from the window to our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. I stood there, frozen in indecision. Should I confront whoever was in there? Should I retreat and call for help? But before I could make up my mind, I heard something that turned my blood to ice. Sarah's scream, piercing through the silence of the night. Without thinking, I burst through the door, flashlight raised like a weapon. "Get away from her!" I yelled, my voice sounding braver than I felt. The scene that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. Sarah was on the bed, her eyes wide with terror, a dark figure looming over her. As my flashlight beam hit them, the intruder spun around. For a moment we all froze, locked in a tableau of fear and surprise. Then everything happened at once. The intruder lunged towards me, a glint of metal in their hand. I swung my flashlight, connecting with a satisfying thud. Sarah screamed again, scrambling off the bed. I grappled with the intruder, my military training kicking in as we crashed into the dresser. Somehow, in the chaos, I managed to pin the intruder down. "Sarah, call the police!" I yelled, struggling to keep the person subdued. But Sarah didn't move. When I glanced at her, confused, I saw that she was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but also guilt. "Tom," she said, her voice shaking. "Stop, please." I loosened my grip slightly, bewildered. "What? Sarah, this person broke in, I let him in," she interrupted, the words tumbling out in a rush. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked down at the intruder, really looked for the first time. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with a face that seemed vaguely familiar. "What's going on?" I demanded, my mind reeling. Sarah took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face. "This is Jason. He's my patient, from the hospital." I let go of Jason, stumbling backward as the implications of her words sank in. Jason scrambled to his feet, looking terrified and ashamed. "I'm so sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Sarah stepped forward, her hands held out placatingly. "Tom, I can explain. Jason's been going through a rough time. He lost his job, his apartment. He had nowhere to go. I've been letting him stay here sometimes when you're out on patrol. The pieces started falling into place. The occasional missing food I'd attributed to my own forgetfulness, the times Sarah had seemed oddly nervous when I came home early. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I wanted to, but you've been so focused on the neighborhood watch, so suspicious of everyone. I was afraid you wouldn't understand." I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, my head spinning. Everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down in the space of a few minutes. "I should go," Jason said quietly, edging towards the door. "No," I said, surprising myself. "No, it's late, and if anyone saw you leaving, it would raise questions." We all sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading into a sort of numb shock. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I never meant to deceive you. I wanted to help." I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew everything about. In that moment, I realized how much had changed between us, how far apart we'd grown without even noticing. "We have a lot to talk about," I said quietly. As the night wore on, we talked, really talked, for the first time in months. Sarah told me about the struggles her patients faced, the helplessness she felt in the face of a system that often failed them. Jason shared his story of how a few bad breaks had left him with nowhere to turn. And I had to confront some hard truths about myself, about how my desire to protect had turned into suspicion and fear, about how I'd been so focused on looking for danger outside that I'd missed what was happening in my own home. By the time the sun rose, we'd come to an understanding. Jason would stay with us properly, no more sneaking around. We'd help him get back on his feet. And Sarah and we had a lot of work to do, rebuilding the trust between us, but we were committed to trying. As I watched the dawn break over our neighborhood, I thought about how differently the night could have ended. If I hadn't hesitated, if I'd called the police right away, the thought made me shudder. I realized then that sometimes the greatest danger isn't from outside threats, but from the walls we build around ourselves, the assumptions we make, the things we refuse to see. That night changed everything for me. I still believe in keeping our community safe, but now I understand that true safety comes from connection, from understanding, from being willing to reach out and help. As I finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted but oddly at peace, I made a silent promise to myself. From now on, I'd patrol my own heart as diligently as I'd patrolled these streets, because sometimes the most important watch we can keep is over our own humanity.